Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on when you are watching this, or maybe even good morning if you're watching this in the replay at your own leisure, which is perfectly fine. I am Shelly Kino, and this is hashtag No Limits. Hashtag No Limits is about people whose society has placed limits upon, but who have busted through those limits. Ophelia says in Hamlet, "We know what we are, but not what we will be." And I 100% believe that. And I also believe that there is no better example of that than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. I saw a beautiful black and blue butterfly today out in nature, and I tried to get a picture of it and it just didn't work. But everywhere I go, when I see the butterflies, I think of the caterpillar and how it has to dissolve into just cells and then reform into the butterfly. And then it has to fight almost to get out of the cocoon in order for its wings to be strong enough for it to fly. And I think that that is a beautiful example of what some people go through. And maybe most people. I mean, it's probably not to that degree of difficulty, but we don't know who we are today. We could be completely somebody different tomorrow. And what I like to do with this show, because I have such a privilege being an education consultant, a former special education teacher, a master IEP coach, I get to see so many stories of people who were struggling and who were told different things when they were younger, or different ways that they were treated. And now they are these beautiful butterflies today. And so I want to share as many of those stories as I can. And so that's what hashtag No Limits is all about. And today I have a guest from across the pond, as we like to say, Victoria Jenkins from Unhidden Clothing. Thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate you being with me today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And tk you for having me.
Yeah.
What a beautiful analogy. You know, I'm just thinking now, am I at the caterpillar stage, or where am I on that journey?
Yeah. And I think all of us, like I said, I think we all go through it at some point. And, you personally have your own limits that people have placed upon you, but you are also now helping others who have had limits placed upon them. And when I say limits, I don't necessarily mean physical limits, but it's a mindset, it's a thought process, or in your situation of Unhidden Clothing, it's the absence of a thought process that was like, oh, let's get into that and talk about and explain that a little bit further. So tell us about yourself, and then we'll get into what you do.
Okay, so my story is a bit convoluted. I have to kind of talk about both my career and my personal life at the same time. So I studied fashion design and graduated in 2008. Went straight into some really wonderful internships, then became a pattern cutter, and eventually a garment technologist, which is like a clothing engineer. And I did that for suppliers to the high street, as well as actually high street brands. And then eventually I ended up going freelance. Now, the reason I went freelance is because of my idea for Unhidden. But the reason that Unhidden even happened was because in the background against my career was a lot of health conditions being diagnosed. I had an undiagnosed ulcer that burst in 2012, and that kind of sent me down a path of multiple surgeries, things being removed, things being rewired, some very, very unpleasant medical tests, radioactive porridge. I don't recommend it.
Wow, yeah.
And the things they can do now. So, that led to a hospital stay. I mean, I had multiple hospital stays, but I had one in 2016 where I met someone who changed my life.
And how did that person change your life?
So me and her, we were the more mobile on the ward. The other two ladies with us we're at what level of sick? We were all very unwell, but they weren't as mobile. So we would sit and talk to each other. She knew at the time I was working at Victoria Beckham on the tailoring. So we would have conversations about clothing. And, we would sort of laugh and joke about how very unglamorous it is being in hospital and how uncomfortable it is to be in the gowns and how very undignified. And obviously, of course, she also would have to remove all of her clothing when the doctors came around to see her, because she'd survived cancer, but she had multiple other conditions that required lots of different specialists to come and look at her. And she still worked. I think that's the biggest misconception about people with disabilities and chronic health conditions, is that we don't work, and or that we can't work, or sometimes that we shouldn't work. I think there's a few things that feed into that. But she had an office job, but she couldn't dress up for it. Was having to go in t-shirt and jogging bottoms. And I just, I thought, well, there must be somebody doing this. This seems really obvious now that she was explaining it to me. And it's sort of like a lightning rod to me. But I honestly assumed that people were doing it. And when I started researching it from my hospital bed, sort of updating her as I was not finding people, basically saying, oh, I found someone, but I don't think you'd like to wear that. And just sort of going through, and there wasn't very much. I mean, that was in 2016. Thankfully, it is very different now. The landscape is much bigger. There's lots more incredible brands doing it. In the UK, we're still really far behind. The States has got far more adaptive designers. But yeah, the idea wouldn't leave me alone. And I thought, how can I use everything that I've learned over a career that's been quite difficult? Fashion industry isn't very kind to people with health conditions, and it was very stressful to try and stay in an industry that just didn't really care about me anyway. So yeah, I took the leap of faith, but then I got so busy working freelance for other people, I actually didn't really do anything with Unhidden until last year, when COVID happened and I had more free time on my hands. I've now managed to turn that the other way, and now I still have no time, but at least I'm always working on Unhidden.
Yeah, it's always amazing when people think they're going to have more time and then they get into things. Like I'm always amazed at people who are retired, because you think, oh, they're retired, they're going to have more free time. And so often I hear retired people tell me they're busier as a retired person than they ever were when they were working full time. So it kind of sounds like the same situation with you. So that's what I meant when I said, it was an absence of thought, that nobody, or well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few, from what you're saying, had thought about, oh, yeah, we do have a population of people that are needing medical attention on a regular basis. And it might be 20 minutes out of their day. It might be a full 24 hours of their day, but giving them access, that nobody thought of that. And until I met you, I hadn't thought of that. And so that's a wonderful opportunity for us all to, again, just sort of think outside the box. And, so I did get the pictures that you sent me. They did pull up just a few minutes ago. So I am going to share those, and then I'll share your website as well. Let me make sure. I think this is the right one. I hope so. Yeah. So is this the pop-up shop, or is this your permanent location?
So yeah, this is the pop-up shop. So the one on the left is actually from the first one that we did in May, which was on Oxford Street in London, and made us the first adaptive brand to ever actually sell on Oxford Street, because no one's ever had that kind of brand there before. And it's also true of the picture on the right is the Cambridge pop-up space, which is another city, which at the moment I'm commuting to every Sunday for the next 3 months.
Okay. So Cambridge is a location I'm very familiar with. My husband was military when I met him and married him, and then we were wonderfully stationed in England for 3 years, about 40 minutes drive from Cambridge and about an hour by train from London. So I'm familiar with both Oxford Street and Cambridge. So this is, I'm picturing it in my head, probably not correctly anymore because it was over 20 years ago, but
yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell you what Cambridge looked like before. I hadn't really been there, but Oxford Street is very different now.
Yeah, I'm sure, as most things are after 20 years.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit, as I'm kind of going through these pictures, like what is the purpose of, or what were you thinking when you were designing these particular pieces?
So, I mean, I tried to answer more than one sort of condition within every garment. Obviously, some of them are really specialized and that's hard to do. So the shirts all have openings down the sleeves, and that is targeted at people that have PICC lines for whatever reason, or if they're going through chemotherapy or radiotherapy. But on top of that, you can also change whether they are snap fastenings, Velcro, or magnetic. So stroke patients or people with cerebral palsy haven't got the dexterity to, spend an hour and a half trying to do up 10 buttons. So if you have magnets or Velcro or even snap fastenings, is still easier than buttons. So it sort of considers that. We technically have 4 pairs of trousers. We have the men's version and the women's version, and there is both a standing and a seated version of those. So the seated version is aimed at wheelchair users, and it just has a longer back rise, essentially, so that trousers aren't designed for sitting in. So things are. So it doesn't gape at the back. You can pull them on. There's side zip entry across all of them. The excess is removed from the back of the knee and as much from the front of the hip as we could. And they're a bit longer as well, because obviously trousers always rise when you sit down, so they're longer for that reason as well. And then the dress that you can see, that's got sort of a hidden adaptation that's underneath the top layer of the dress. So that allows catheters, tubes, stoma access without you having to lift up your skirt or take your clothes off generally. And it's got slits kind of at the side, which helps with wheelchair users, that it's not so much bunching up around because it's separated from the top. And the keyhole is a nice design feature, but again, it also helps access to chest ports without having to sort of fiddle around with lots of things or feed it down through your arm, which can be really uncomfortable.
This is amazing. I mean, I am not a medical professional, but I have, because of my special education teaching and different family members who have gone through things, I have a lot of experience as a bystander, I guess. And I'm just looking at this and just so impressed and thinking how the patients, this must make them feel so much better. I mean, the mental health aspect of looking good, dressing nice, having the access, just being able to be as quote unquote normal as possible. And this is just so amazing. And I'm so thankful that, I hate to say that I'm thankful that you were in the hospital, but I'm thankful that you came up with the idea.
I mean, I have referred to it before as, I have everything that I've gone through. While I wouldn't wish it on anybody else, I do see it as a gift. I always wanted to do something good. I just didn't really know what. And then it sort of, with my health, it was very much more a case of just trying to survive more than anything else. And then having this idea and seeing the genuine impact that it can have, just to be included, but also to be comfortable. 80% of people with disabilities are not born with them. So, there's an awful lot of people that overnight are going through something that's already traumatic and then returning home and not being able to wear their own clothes and not having anybody consider them. And it's, before it's been referred to as niche, but it's 1 in 5 people in the UK and it's 1 in 4 in the US. So It's not niche. There's really quite a lot of it. It's 15% of the global population. So, it just, I think it's a case of dignity and inclusion that, it has been lacking. I definitely feel like the conversation is shifting, maybe not quickly enough, because essentially, while I've created this purely because I wanted to create something that I wasn't seeing, something that was fashionable, but it was joyful, it was positive, it wasn't sort of disability in this sort of very negative light.
Oh no, her internet froze. She was saying that there might be difficulty. Oh, there we go. I think you're back. You were gone for a few seconds. You were frozen.
Yes.
The internet is a wonderful and joyful thing when it works and everyone's connections are strong. There we go. Are you back? Maybe not. And for anyone who is just joining us today, Victoria is in England and I am in the United States. So, I really don't know how the internet works and how all of those kinds of things go, but maybe that has something to do with it too. um, Victoria, you may want to log out and then come back in. Sometimes that helps with the connection. Because right now you're completely frozen. I don't have any sound from you. I don't even know if you can hear me or see me at this point. While she's trying to get that figured out, I will go ahead and show you a few more pictures that she sent. I imagine these are the trousers that she was talking about just a few minutes ago. And then here in a second, what I will do is take you to her website. So you can see she's got some zippers, and then I guess these are some of the men's versions. But this is just fascinating to me, how these things were not available and now they are again. Hello, are you back?
Hello. I hope
right.
So.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. It's
That's okay.
Happening like the last 3 weeks. Ever since I got a monitor, it's just seems to have everything just won't work anymore.
Oh,
not helpful.
Well, I know. I was explaining, I don't know how much you heard, but, I was telling anyone who was joining us late that, you're in England and I'm in the United States, and didn't know if that has anything to play into it at all or not. But so where we lost you was we were talking about just, that you're very proud of what you're doing because it hadn't really been done before, and that you wanted to always do something good, and hadn't always been sure of what that was. And you had given some statistics about, that it's like 15% of the world's population, and 1 in 5 in the UK and 1 in 4 in the US. And something that you said that I definitely want to just kind of circle back to is that 80% of people with a disability were not born with that disability. And as someone in the world of special education, I don't think I was aware of that statistic. And so again, that is kind of, it still goes along with my butterfly caterpillar analogy, but it's kind of the other way around, in the sense that normally when I think about it, I think of, those limits that have been placed on people when they were younger, and then they grow up and they do all these things that people didn't expect them to be able to do. But there is the other side of it, that we're all one breath, one car accident, one whatever away from being a person
exactly. It's
who's like disabled. You're now the internet is lagging. You're there, but it's very slow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it shouldn't come from a place, people should want to know more about this, not everybody. No. I can't.
You're still there. It's just really sketchy.
Hopefully it just picks up.
Yeah.
And I'll speak slower in the hope that it doesn't distort this how we go. It will. Okay, I'm going to see what happens if I disconnect from my phone and attach to the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I know sometimes the weather plays too, and I don't know the weather here is just really hot. I don't know what it's doing anywhere else in the world. All right.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's much better now.
Okay. All right. Well, fingers crossed the Wi-Fi doesn't decide to be a pest. We can get through this without any disruption. So I think the reason people don't realize how, like, the actual proportion of people that aren't born disabled, I think a lot of people assume that people are, is because the representation isn't there. You know, I think even when we do represent disability, which is only 2 to 3% of the time across the media, which is very small, we still, even then, we are only really showing people with visible disabilities. So that doesn't take into account mental health conditions, or, you know, like an unobvious prosthetic or stomas, or, I mean, there's a huge array of things that it doesn't cover. So, yeah, I think it's just one of those, it's a side effect of not representing and including the community, because disability is a mainstream experience. You know, everybody will be touched by it at some point. And as the population ages and we expand and there's more of us and there's climate change and accidents and there's more of us driving, like the amount of people with a disability is expanding. So, you know, sort of the sooner that people start thinking inclusively and, you know, not without a little bit of empathy as well, then it will make it a lot easier. Because I think that's the problem. And certainly how I first addressed it was, imagine suddenly not being able to wear your clothes.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, not that there's no hierarchy, in my opinion, with disability. There's no one that's worse off than somebody else. Although obviously there are in certain scenarios, but in terms of clothing, you're either born with this need and you don't have access to it, or you've got used to having it and then it's taken away. And I think that can be, especially in a world with things like Instagram and social media, I think for the younger people with disabilities to suddenly not be able to dress the same way as their friends, not be able to shop in the same places, has a really big impact. And it adds another barrier to applying for jobs, or go, you know, even being able to attend a wedding and just to feel good and to look nice. And I think, you know, getting dressed is something we legally have to do to leave the house.
Right.
So it still astounds me that there aren't more brands designing inclusively. And it's, you know, they know the numbers, they know the size of the market, they know exactly how many of us. They also know they already have disabled customers because they have nowhere else to go. So you know, they might be buying from them anyway, but they could be treating them better and including them in marketing campaigns and it generally. But yeah. Sorry, I went off a bit of a wander there.
No, I mean, because it is an area that obviously is very overlooked, or maybe it's not overlooked, but it's not addressed. And it didn't mean to use that word, but
it's quite nice though. I like
that. But yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, that's what this show is about, is broadening people's perspectives and helping them maybe get a sense of what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, you know. And I think most people take it for granted that clothing is clothing. You know, they don't think about it. They, you know, they put it on, they go about their day, they take it off, they, you know, whatever. And it's not something that I would guess the majority of people really think about, how simple it is for them and how difficult, or even if it's not, you know, like we talked about before with the dexterity and the ability levels to unbutton buttons or unsnap snaps or snap or button, those kinds of things, which that's amazing too, that you thought of that they're, you know, the different fastening types. But yeah, just like, oh, you know, like the person in hospital with you, and the fact that she worked in an office and she wanted to look nice, but she had medical equipment that basically prevented her from being able to do that.
Yeah. Or causes physical pain. You know, it shouldn't be a choice of jogging bottoms or it will hurt you just so that you can look nice and fit in. Like I didn't think that was I don't think that's a choice anybody should have to be making.
Right. No, that's very true. And again, you know, when I do these, I learn oftentimes along with the audience, because again, that's not necessarily something that I've thought about. And so finding you and hearing more about this is broadening my horizons and changing my perspectives. And, you know, this is something that needs to be talked about, as you said, you know. And so speaking of things that need to be talked about, I said to you just before we went on air today that I did not know you were an author. until I saw your LinkedIn post today. And I want to talk a little bit about ableism, which is what your book was about. Is that the title of the book?
Well, the book is called The Little Book of Ableism because it's a huge topic. And whilst sort of researching it, I was just doing the history of ableism, and that in itself, I sort of realized that could be a whole book. It would also be a very depressing book. So I thought, well, let's start with a gateway, like a really just cut through the basics, because it's hugely broad. I can't speak for 1.2 billion people, but I can communicate some of the sort of the common pitfalls that people have. Because I think a lot of the reason that people aren't including people with disabilities is that same fear of getting it wrong or feeling stupid or causing offense. And it's just stopping people. It's really not very difficult to sort of overcome it, but someone's got to start and someone's got to try. And, because I'm so much in that space, I forget how much I take for granted that I know. And then when it's speaking to somebody, non-disabled who's not at all in that space, and then sort of like maybe even just a phrase that I said completely changes how they view something, and they realize, oh, I've been saying and doing that the whole time. I mean, I 100% have said terribly ableist things to myself and thought that way about other people, and I just didn't know what it was. I mean, ableism as a word hasn't even been, I don't know how to trace the word, but it's not been around very long. It's not even I know it's not in the German dictionary, for example. Like, they don't have a word for it. And I think it's really helped a lot of people with disabilities and chronic health conditions, because there's that kind of, there's some very big ableist problems, and then there's like the microaggressions. So when someone's sort of saying, well, it could be worse, well, it could be better, but what are you trying to do with that phrase? It's not making me feel better. And there's so many examples of that as well. So
So can you give
the goal that I would write, sort of then go sort of do a deeper dive into all of the topics that I cover very seriously broadly, but try and do them with other voices, bring other people in, because you talk about race and disability, and I can't talk about that. It's not my experience. Or transgender and disability. There are so many areas where I want to bring other people in, and then eventually that would all become a series of books that will become the big book of ableism. It's kind of my long-term goal.
Okay.
So
just for anybody who maybe is thinking, well, I don't know what ableism is, you gave a couple of examples, but is there like a definition that you kind of work from? I know you said there's not one in the dictionary, but...
So the definition is essentially it's the discrimination or prejudice against a person with a disability in the sort of with the idea that non-disabled people are better, superior, and more able. So, I mean, that feeds into lots of different things. It express itself in lots of different ways. And some can seem like really, innocuous. I had a really sort of interesting conversation with friends that disagreed with me on this, talking about use of the phrase blind spot. Now, when you're referring to driving, not a problem. You can absolutely use that phrase. But if you're saying, someone's got a blind spot when it comes to that subject, what you're doing is attaching a disability to a negative action. And therefore, that's where the problem comes in. And also, I think, and I have this in the book as sort of a quote, is if somebody in the room with a disability that you're using, if someone was deaf and you said the phrase tone deaf, or blind spot and there was someone blind in the room with you, would you still say the phrase, or would you pause? And it's that knowledge that you probably would pause because some way that you shouldn't be doing it. But so much of our language is based on using disability as a negative. And that's where a lot of the language problems come from, is associating disability with bad, whereas disabled itself is not a bad word. It's a descriptor. There's no problem with it. People with a disability want you to use that word. What they don't want is you to use like all the little euphemisms that come around it. I think differently abled was come up with in, I want to say in the 80s, but it might be the 1880s or it might be the 1980s, in the States by 4 congressmen who didn't want to use the word disabled, but none of them were disabled.
Right.
They didn't want to use the word because it had negative connotations. And that's kind of I can see you're freezing a little bit. Oh, no, you're back.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was me or you.
Non-disabled people. Yeah. And that's again, it's a common it's a common problem is people without a disability making decisions or assumptions and labeling things when you should let people with disabilities decide the language.
So I'll be honest with you, I haven't liked the word disabled because when I think of the prefix dis, it means not. And so, you know, in all my experience as a special education teacher, that's always where I felt the problem stemmed from, is because when other people, whether they were teachers or you know, just family members or the, you know, students, when they would hear the word disabled, I think to me, that set that in their minds that those people who were in special education were not able. And so that's interesting to me that a person who is disabled would want that term to be the term used to describe you, when to me that's like, well, no, there's that, because that to me is what sets that superior feeling.
Sure. But then that comes from, you've been taught that disabled is bad and negative. And even though like dis obviously is a no sort of thing, I think that's, and don't get me wrong, not every single person is going to agree with what I just said either.
Right. No.
The sort of, you know, the general consensus is disabled and disability is just a description. It's not negative. It's only when we don't want to use it because we think it's negative. It's, you know, and I still have a very up and down relationship myself with using that word to reference myself or to other people. I mean, there are people with, you can have 20 people with the same condition that don't consider themselves disabled. Technically they are. I mean, the definition of a disability is something that will cause you daily symptoms and change that, you know, impact your life daily for the rest of your life that won't go away. That is a disability. So that's very broad. And that's why it covers so many things.
Right.
And that's why I think, you know, when we try and look for a word that's acceptable, that's why disability and disabled is kind of the only ones, because obviously the other words that we have used in the past are all pretty awful, you know, like the R word, the C word, although obviously people have reclaimed it to some degree. But I think, again, it's one of those, if you're not sure, don't use those words. And the R word just doesn't need, doesn't have any place. We don't need to replace that word, I don't think. I think there's some that they can just get in the bin now. We don't need those words anymore. So that's what I try to do in the book, was sort of say, if you know, if this is the word you're trying to say, or here's why it's a problem, here's what you can say instead. But obviously with some of them, I've sort of said, just don't say this thing and don't replace it with anything either. Just think about why you're saying that and what your intention is behind it.
So how do you feel about the phrase special needs? Is that bad to you? You don't like that?
It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. But, you know, I've had conversations with a lot of parents, with special education teachers like yourself. It's the overrunning sort of consensus that I've heard is that adults that were those children hate that phrase, and they wish that they would be asked, because that's not, it separated them. The feeling generally is that it wasn't special, it was extra, and it was a burden, and that was put onto the person. So that's what I've heard from, and the feedback that I've had from a lot of people. There's still people using that phrase. I'm not going to go out and say you shouldn't use that word. I personally am not a fan, because I find it is a bit of a euphemism. They're not special needs, they're needs. So let's address the needs. That's kind of how I see it. And I think also just because the connotations that people have now put on the word special, especially in the UK, I don't know if they do it in the States, but, you know, when I was in primary school, you know, and it's a terrible example, but, you know, you'd say, oh, you're a bit, if someone was being daft or they said something wrong, you'd say, are you being a bit special, with, you know, referencing special needs. Right. So especially in UK terms and in slang, it's not a great phrase. And as I said, like adults that were those kids, the majority are not that comfortable with that phrase either. But it's just, you know, it was the phrase that we needed at the time.
Yeah.
And I think even saying that, you know, disabled is the preferred word now, that's probably going to change. You know, language does change. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And the reason that I asked how you feel about special needs, that phrase is because I have, in my career, I used to teach the kids that I said learn differently. So I don't know if in the UK
I
you
like
have
that.
the specific learning disability label, but I never liked that LD, that learning disability. To me, they just learn differently. And so and that's why they would come to special education, is because they weren't able to learn the way the teacher in the gen ed rooms were teaching. They were able to learn, but it just had to be presented differently. And so learned differently was how I was titled often, as I was the different learners teacher, or because I didn't want to be the special education teacher, because of the connotations that would come along with that sometimes. However, I am also an author, which I don't think you probably knew. And my book just came out in November, and it's called Those Who Can't Teach. And then the subtitle below it, and I went back and forth, and my editor is the parent of a child with, her child is an adult now, with autism. And we really struggled with trying to come up with a term or a phrase. And so this is what we came up with: this is true stories of special needs families to promote acceptance, inclusion, and empathy. And it was a real struggle, because there is such that discussion happening in the States. And apparently it's happening in the UK as well, as to what is a phrase that is acceptable, what is not going to be offensive to the people who are feeling. Every chapter, there's 10 chapters in this book, and every chapter is a different family or individual's story, and they are that person or the family who has the differently abled person or the different learner in their family. And so, just talking with them, and the R word is used in the book only because one of the families, when their child was diagnosed, this was back in the 80s, the 1980s, and the school district said to the parent, well, because of the mental retardation and the this and the da 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 da. And so I wanted to leave that in because that was authentic to the time.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's the thing. When it's part of a story, there's, it's not, don't ever use the word, in the same way that, if you're describing an account of things that were said between two people, if one of them use a word that's problematic, you can't pull it out, because it's kind of part of the thing. And I mean, I think even now, I would hope most doctors don't use that word anymore. But again, at the time, that's what people said. So it's just the fact that language changes and moves around.
Yeah, and I think because of that, it makes it difficult to know what to say when, and because I don't think most people are trying to be offensive, or but it's like, it's the thinking behind the words of the person that's hearing the words.
Yes.
That so thank you for talking to me about that. I've never really talked with anyone. So let's get back to your clothing line. And I haven't shown the website. I did during one of the times when you were frozen. I showed more of the pictures that you had sent me in the email. But I do want to go to your website and just let everybody see that. And then we can also give them the address for that, which it's just unhiddenclothing.com. Yep. So this again is the dress, I guess, that we saw the picture of previously.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, so we were very lucky. We had 12 volunteer models for the shoot. And I speak to almost all of them now. We have a WhatsApp group. Some of them are very busy. Some of them sort of left the group because every now and again it gets very, people hit mute, I think, which is absolutely fair enough. So I mean, not everybody needed each of the features in each of the garments as they were wearing them. And I didn't have any male wheelchair users in that shoot. But we have had some male wheelchair users buy the clothes from us now. So, that's kind of what it's all about and what it's for, really.
Yeah. So this is just so awesome that you are doing this, and it's beautiful stuff. I mean,
Well, thank you. I mean, that was the thing. I wanted it to look like a fashion shoot. I didn't want it to look like a medically themed thing or carers or function. And I didn't want it to necessarily, you almost can't tell, even though you can see an awful lot more people with a disability, you can't necessarily tell what it is. It could just be a clothing range that
Right.
I've used diverse models, could be the argument, which is why all the adaptations I put in, they're meant to be kind of hidden. That's kind of the I don't know, the twist is that you can't see what it is that I've done to make them adaptive.
Right. Which is, I think that just makes it even more beautiful. So I like what you say here, that it's pajama free adaptive fashion. So does that come from when you were in hospital and the woman that you spoke to just basically wearing the jogging pants and the t-shirts?
Yeah, it's a bit from that, because essentially, if there is adaptive clothing, or if traditionally what there has been, it is still very pajama-like or leisure wear. I mean, I still get asked, when am I going to do leisure wear? Which is something, for further down the path. But the whole point is that exists already. I wanted to create something that I wasn't seeing that didn't exist.
Right.
So yeah, so it's it's not just people with disabilities. We're not just lying around in our pajamas.
Right,
we're
exactly.
We need to, we're working. We like to get dressed up. We have style, all the rest of it, which is why I wanted to shoot it the way that we did.
Yeah, your website is beautiful as well. And so again, talking about a little bit about the before I pull the website off, was there anything specific that you wanted me to share or show?
I mean, I think to get to the book, you have to go onto the shop. I need to check the function myself, because I built this from a template. I'm not a website designer. I've done what I can.
Yeah.
So the book is available on here, and it is you can buy it in paperback or hardback, or as an ebook. It's also on Amazon. I haven't worked out how to get it as a paperback through Amazon, because they wanted to completely change. You had to use their features to create the front cover, and I thought, well, I don't really want another book out there that doesn't look the same as the original. So until I can get somebody else to deal with that headache, this is where it's available from for now.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean it's just, again, I mean it's all beautiful, and it looks very, and I hate to use this word, I really do. It looks very normal. I never like to say it unless I put it in quotation marks.
No one likes it. That's the thing. It's such a hard word, isn't it? But
yeah, because truly, what is normal?
What it is. It was to. I didn't, even though it's an adaptive brand, I didn't want to other people. I just wanted to show them as they are. So even though I know most people with disabilities want to be able to shop the same place as everyone else, until those people pull their socks up and actually start practicing what they preach when it comes to inclusivity, I will be there plugging that gap as much as I can.
Yeah. I feel like we're missing something that we said we were going to talk about. And I'm sorry, I have a bad headache today, and so my brain is just not.
Fine. I mean, I've written notes. It was what the range covered. I had down my hospital stay, and then like the mental health impact. That's what I had down to make sure that we discussed, which I think we've added in some things as well that we didn't talk about yesterday.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, because I didn't know that you were the author, like I said, until I saw your LinkedIn post today.
I mean, sometimes I forget, to be honest. In January, I didn't know I was going to write a book this year, and then I think I just had so many conversations and thought this would be really helpful if I could just say, here, read that, and then it will make a bit more sense. Obviously, in a nice way. That sounds like I'm very aggressive about it. I'm trying to say to people, we can't beat ourselves up over this. Like, we don't teach about disability in schools. We don't do it in the workplace. So how would you know? How would you know any of it? And if the media isn't showing it to people, the assumption is it's not that big of a problem, because if it was a problem, we'd be seeing it. But of course, you don't see it because you're not shown it. So kind of this whole little ball of we're all here. There's a lot of us, and we walk, roll, and dance amongst you. So
yeah, and that's something that
just trying to shine a light on that.
that you and I have in common in the sense that when I wrote my book, I did use some of those statistics. And I said, you have a 1 in 6 chance of interacting with someone who has a disability. Whether you acknowledge or know that they have that doesn't make a difference. There's a 1 in 6 chance, because that's that 15% worldwide. So it could be your neighbor, it could be somebody in your class. And I don't know if you'll be able to really speak to this, but like, I know here in the United States, we do a really poor job of explaining and talking to the majority of the population, so meaning the 85% who are non-disabled, about the 15% who are disabled. And we do a great job of teaching those 15% to fit in with the others, but we don't do it the other way around.
Yeah, no, it's the same here. It's very much, can we take up less space? Can we, don't ask for accommodations, or we're expected to be very grateful for the few crumbs of inclusion and access that we get. I mean, a stat that really blew my mind when I was researching the book was, for 40% of people with a medical condition or a disability, their main barrier to medical care was getting in the building. So like 40% of people can't actually get in the building to see a doctor because it's not accessible. And you just think, I just don't really stand a chance. They're doing. And then once you start to look at buildings and how they're laid out, and it's not just ramps. That's like the most basic version of accessibility. It's where handles are, signposting, braille, whether or not people are going to be. I think actually a huge conversation needs to happen around guide dogs and therapy animals, because people that don't know just see an animal and they don't know how they're supposed to interact. They basically usually go and pet them, which is you're not supposed to do that. They're a working animal, and it's, as soon as you tell people and they know, they're mortified or they realize, but there's no big sort of, up until now, I would say there's been no big conglomeration of people saying this is what you need to do. I mean, I don't know. They must be stateside as well. We have the Valuable 500, which is, so they're an organization that is signed up to huge companies, I think like Virgin, O2, I'm trying to think, BP, all sorts of weird companies. They've all signed up to basically to include people with disabilities in their hiring practice and to put disability on the agenda within their businesses. So that's been, and that only was a couple of months ago here.
Oh, okay.
So that's a good step. And then with the Paralympics now, it's been an interesting couple of days, seeing exactly what I knew I would see, and the whole inspiration, overcoming a disability sort of thing, which is very tired and old, and very ableist. And there's a new campaign called We Are the 15, which is amazing. They've shot some beautiful film. It's all been developed with people with disabilities as consultants and starring in it. And again, that's more companies and brands signing up to that to. I think their mission statement is to make it the biggest human rights movement. Finally, because it's only been 30 years since the ADA. I think here it's only 25 since the Equalities Act. We really haven't had a very long time where we've had any kind of equality. Right. So there's very positive steps, I think, that are happening now.
That's wonderful. So here in the United States, we do have a law. It's called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that is what created the special education system in our public schools. Does the UK have something like that in the school systems, or do you still have mostly the kids?
If they do, they ignore it. This is the thing. It's very,
okay.
It's hard to know what they actually listen to and what they don't, because it's still really what happens is mostly it's segregation. And there's all sorts of policies like standalone schools or within schools. I'm not entirely sure what the current legislation is. All I do know is that it's not very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and like your Equalities Act, that Education Act is only 40-ish years old, 45 something, somewhere 40, 45 years old. And when it comes to laws and change, that really isn't a long time. feels like it's a long time, but when you think about it generationally, it's really only, like when the people that were in place when the law was put in place, the students that they taught are now the students that are coming up and saying, okay, we've had this law for 20 years. Now we need to fix this. And, these things are still not right. So then we've had that. And so we're really only like 2 generations away from when, and I don't know about, it sounds like the same over there, but over here, the wheels of change in education move slower than a snail. Is that, you think that's the same there too?
Sometimes we go backwards, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think,
and to be perfectly honest, I think one of the main reasons that I wrote my book and why I want this show is because it is about changing people's hearts. Until I feel you can change and reach someone's heart, you can have 1,000 laws, and it isn't necessarily going to change people's ways of treating other people.
No.
And
it's that sort of very human, you don't care about it until it happens to you.
Right.
So I think, it's that we need to sort of break that down, and we need people to care before it happens to them, and not because of pity, and not because they're terrified of joining us, but because it's human.
Right.
And we should. It's just, it's one of those, it's the right thing to do. I don't understand people that, you can't want equality for some people, but not all people. And I think when we talk about equality, a lot of people forget that includes disability.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you 100%. And the first chapter in my book is about my journey from not understanding enough about people with disabilities. Because when I was growing up, the law was just put into place. Like around the time that I started school was when the law went into place. And, it takes a long time for those changes to happen. And I was never taught to look down on anyone. In fact, I was taught the opposite. I mean, I do feel like my parents directly taught me, everybody is a human, everybody is equal. But the way the school set it up, the way that society set it up, I didn't think that I would be able to work with, and the reason it says those is because that's how I don't think I can work with those kids. I don't think I'll have anything in common with those kids. It wasn't that I was using it negative. It was just, it was those, because I didn't know them.
Yeah.
And, it took me like 20 years. It took that exposure to working with people with disabilities that I didn't realize they were the students that I would have in my classroom if I became a special education teacher. I was hired as an aide in a classroom where some kids needed some reading help. I worked with kids who needed some math help. I worked with kids who needed some behavior help. It never, until after the fact, I went, oh, those are the students that I would have as my special education students. I absolutely, there's children first. Just like every other child, that I would teach, they would all be children first.
Yeah.
And so to me, it took me too long to come to that change. And that's, the reason for the book, the telling of the stories, the reason for doing this, because I'm only one person, and I know it takes that one-to-one heart change. But that one-to-one heart change is hopefully going to then change someone else's heart, is going to change someone else's heart. Yeah. And, I don't have at this current time a huge audience of people that watch this, but I feel that if we can reach one person.
Exactly. Even one. And I mean, you've written a book and people have bought your book. So then maybe they'll lend it to their friend. And it's that ripple effect that's, it's probably more powerful than yelling into an auditorium of like 20,000 people who you can't really connect with, on that level. They just walk away and go, oh, that's an interesting point, and stroll away. I think it is much more meaningful to have these smaller conversations.
Yeah. And to show that, everyone is able. what they're able to
Yes.
do at the level that they're able to do it is different.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, that's, to me, that's
just
the bottom
varying
line.
degrees of all being a human, really.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Victoria, it is time. I never like to go longer than an hour, and we are at 55 minutes. And so I want to make sure, that you've had a chance to say everything that you've wanted to say. I mean, as I always express to my guests, this is your chance to tell your story the way you want it told. So I want to give you one last opportunity if there's anything else that you would like to say.
Goodness me. No, I think we've covered it. I think it's really important that people consider invisible disabilities and illness, and stop this whole, you can tell if someone's disabled by looking at them nonsense, that because we can't. I think that's really, I mean, especially because that's what impacts me most, is this whole, you don't look sick, or you don't, or, well, you look good though, which is kind of a backhanded compliment to, yes, potentially, but I would really rather not be on medication or in pain,
Right.
swings roundabouts. So I think, just a little consideration, and just to go away and think about what disability is and why, like, see what comes up, and like, what is your opinion on it, and why do you have that opinion? Like, where did it come from? Because the thing is, and what you're doing with your book and what I'm trying to do with mine, is stopping that, like, stop perpetuating the same sort of things from happening. It's breaking that, and that can only happen by educating ourselves and speaking differently to our children about what disability is.
Yeah. I completely agree. Well, thank you so very much again for being with me today. And someday I hope to get back to England. And if I do, I will be sure to stop at Oxford Street or up in Cambridge and stop in your shop and maybe get to meet you in person. Of course, it'd be our luck that, you would be at Cambridge and I would be at the Oxford Street. So. Yeah. But thank you again. If anyone would like to check her out again, her website is unhiddenclothing.com, and make sure to share this, because even if you are sharing this from the United States, as she said, there are companies here doing it, but we need to have more. And her company there in the UK is doing it, and doing it beautifully. And thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And you too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, parents and teachers, are you tired of IEP meetings that feel like a battle? Let's put an end to the tension and create a collaborative, calm, and respectful environment together. Shelley Keno, your go-to IEP consultant, can transform your meetings into positive and productive experiences. With Shelley Keno, your child is her top priority, your voice is heard, and you become confident. Shelley Keno is making the world better for all, one IEP at a time. Visit www.shelleykeno.com for more information and set up your free 20-minute consultation today. That's shelleykeno.com, SHELLEYKENOW.